When I arrived at the nursing home, the hospice nurse informed me that they were keeping my father comfortable. They gave him medication for the pain as well as the anxiety. As I sat by his side, going back and forth between crying and being silently numb, I believed that grief was something that happened to a person. The tears that fell endlessly, the uncontrollable sobs that stole my breath each time I tried to speak. But over the 23 years that have passed since my father's death, I've come to learn over and over again that grief is not something to survive. I found grief to be one of the deepest expressions of love that I have, and it has enriched my life in ways I could never have imagined. I was just 33 when my sister called to tell me that her father was dying. If I wanted to see him again, I would need to book a flight to Boston as soon as possible. I was by his side the next day. My brother, sister, stepmother, and I sat with him, crying, telling him we loved him. His breathing had slowed, and occasionally there'd be a long pause after he exhaled. And we'd all hold our breath thinking, this is it. And then he would inhale again. We were exhausted with the anticipation. But after 8 days, my father took his final breath. We cried and we hugged one another until it seemed like the only thing there was to do was to give him a kiss and say goodbye. As I walked out of the room, I thought to myself, is that it? We had a Jewish funeral service for him that I wasn't all that familiar with because my dad wasn't a practicing Jew and our mom had baptized as Christian. But I was grateful for what the service provided. Once I was back home, it was a vulnerable time, and for a while, I contemplated converting to Judaism. But as the months passed, I discovered it wasn't Judaism I was seeking. It was the ritual that the service provided, because it gave me direction with the grieving process, which at the time seemed like a way out of the emptiness I was feeling. But life had more in store for me. 3 years later, at age 36, I was diagnosed with stage 2 rectal cancer. When my doctor told me I had a 75% chance of survival, I heard there was a 25% chance I was going to die. I had a wife, a 9-year-old stepson, and a 4-month-old baby boy. I had barely started life with my new family, and there I was facing the possibility of my own death. I was so afraid, but I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not living. And living meant growing old with my family. But first I had to decide which life-saving treatment to go with. I thought to myself, what if I make the wrong choice and I die? About a month in, it hit me all at once. There's a good chance I am going to die. If I spend the rest of my days worrying about dying, I'm going to miss what life I have left. And the thought of that was more heartbreaking to me than death itself. I realized that life itself is the gift. Not any particular circumstances I may or may not have. Not a future I imagine where everything works out, but the life I'm living right now. Whether I lived or died was irrelevant. Death was a distraction. So I devoted myself to meeting life however it unfolded and being as true to myself as I knew how. But I was raised in a small blue-collar town where I learned early on to hide my grief, to be ashamed of it. If you don't know how vulnerable it feels to face the real possibility of your own death, I will tell you I found it to be shockingly vulnerable. I was heartbroken at the thought of dying, yet I felt the need to hide it so I wouldn't appear weak. Till I finally decided I was no longer willing to die hiding who I was, to die a fraud. So I stopped pretending and made myself vulnerable. I told the truth about how difficult it really was. And I was finally free to openly grieve the possibility of my life ending way too soon. But then at age 38, I did my final chemo treatment, and a month later, My doctor told me I was cancer-free. For the next 2.5 years, I tried to incorporate this vulnerable way of living into my life. I did not do well. My marriage ended. I lost my job. And a few months later, my doctor's office called and told me the cancer was back. This time it was stage 4 cancer, metastasized to my liver. I'd heard about people with stage 4 cancer diagnoses. I believed I would be dead in a matter of years. My life became much quieter. I began to reflect much more deeply upon what it was to live and what it would be to die. Naturally, I didn't want to die, but I accepted it as part of life. And I prepared myself to meet my death fully. All the grief, the pain, the heartbreak, the love, come what may. But as you can see, death did not come. I was 42 years old when I did my last chemotherapy treatment, and again my doctor's office called and told me I was cancer-free. About 10 years passed when my sister called and told me that our stepmother died of COVID. She was like a second mother to me. She'd been in my life since I was 8 years old. I knew she was growing old and slowing down, but I didn't expect to lose her like that, not so suddenly. On the morning of her funeral, I received another phone call that my aunt, her sister, who was also in town for the funeral, had suffered a massive brain bleed and was now in the hospital with just days to live. Heartbroken and sobbing, I showered, I got dressed, and I made my way to the cemetery for my stepmother's graveside service. It was beautiful. And after a large group of us went and had lunch, we shared pictures of her, we told stories about her, we laughed, we cried, we grieved her death, we celebrated her life. And when it was over, I told my siblings that I was going to go visit our aunt and likely meet them later that evening for dinner. So I drove to the hospital, found my way to my aunt's room. On the way in, by the nurse's station, they told me that her condition had gotten much worse and she was very close to death. So I called my cousins, who couldn't be there in time, and I put the phone on speaker so they could say their goodbyes and tell her they loved her one last time. A few hours later, my aunt took her final breath. I said a prayer for her, and I pressed the nurse call bell and I requested some fresh towels. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a specific plan in mind. I'd heard about ritual washings. I didn't know why they were done or even how. But after losing my father and stepmother like that, I needed more than to just say goodbye. I needed to honor her. So I ran the towels under warm water, and I washed her sweet face. And I washed her hands and her forearms. And I walked to the foot of the bed and I washed her feet. At which point I was overwhelmed, not only with grief, but with a deep reverence for the privilege it was to do this for her. I sat with her for quite some time. And when I felt complete, I bowed to her and I said goodbye. I walked down the hall with tears streaming down my face. I told a passing nurse that no one else would be coming. It felt so permanent. I entered the parking garage to find wherever I'd parked my car just a few short hours ago. And the pain of all the day's loss burst through me. I could not control my crying, nor did I want to. I doubled over, hands on my knees, sobs heaving through my body. It's what I can only describe as a primal pain that just ripped through me. In just a matter of hours, I buried my stepmother and sat with my aunt as she died. It's so painful and so heart-wrenching. I could never have imagined it unfolding like this. And yet, I felt gratitude for the privilege it was to love them. So I went and found my car, and I sat in the driver's seat until I could breathe calmly again. Then I drove to a nearby restaurant where I met my brother and sister for dinner. We told stories of them both. We cried, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. The intimacy that I had created with my aunt's death showed me that grief could be devastating, yet at the same time profoundly beautiful. Just a few days prior, I thought I had some understanding of death. After all, I'd experienced my father's death. I'd faced the possibility of my own death twice. But nothing could have prepared me for how I lost my aunt and stepmom. A couple years later, I was 53. My mom was 87. She'd been in and out of the hospital a lot. On a Wednesday evening in early May, it was one of those times. She was in the hospital with congestive heart failure. I drove up to the hospital and I sat with her, holding her hand, telling her how much I loved her. She wasn't speaking much. She mostly just smiled and said, "I love you too." On Thursday, I called her and told her I'd see her on Friday after work, but early Friday morning, I received a call from my stepfather. He told me the nurse had called and said that they'd done all they could, but she wasn't going to last much longer. I woke my son, I got in the car, we drove to the hospital, and within 15 minutes of our arrival, she stopped breathing. Moments later, her heart stopped beating and she was gone. 3 generations sat with her crying, overwhelmed with grief. At one of those odd times where the crying just stops and the breathing calms, I called my brother and then my sister. They were both in California. I let them know that our dear mother had died. And then I took the hands of my stepfather and my son, and I said a prayer for my mother. And as I did with my aunt, I performed a ritual washing of her body. But this time I knew why I was doing it. I was creating an intimacy with the vessel of a body that was once my mother. I needed an intimacy with her death. You see, we've all heard the phrase, "You only live once," a call to live life to the fullest. Well, my mother's death was only going to happen once, so I stepped into it fully. When I kissed her goodbye and I told her I loved her for the last time, I was devastated. But I didn't feel the emptiness that I'd known so many years before with my father, because I knew the value of grief and I welcomed it. And at her funeral, when I gave her eulogy, I praised my mother with all my heart. And I let my heart break in front of everyone, for all to see, with no part of myself hidden. As a young man, I faced the possibility of my own death twice, and in doing so, I surrendered to the inevitability of death without surrendering my desire to live. For much of my life, I believed that hiding my grief took strength, only to discover it simply revealed how afraid I was of being vulnerable. I've since come to believe that grieving the deaths of those we love is a fundamental expression of being human. Learn to honor it and to listen for what it asks of me so that each time death comes, I may have some understanding of how to meet it. I find myself with a rich and fulfilling life because I keep death close to my heart. Not something I cling to, but something I hold gently, with curiosity. Not something good or bad, right or wrong, but simply the natural fulfillment of every human life. Something to be honored and ritualized. When we're truly present to how much we love those who are dearest to us, we will be present to grief because We know that either we will lose our loved ones or they will lose us. When we're truly present to love, we will be present to grief. So I'm not here to suggest to any of you that I know what is best. My way is not the way. It's just one way. But if I've given you anything today, my hope is that I've inspired you to listen for what death asks of you. Thank you.